I'm David Wood. I'm curator of the Concord Museum, and I'm here with Daniel Chester French's Concord Minute Man of 1775. That was a commission that the 21-year-old French received in 1871 to make a full-size version of this sculpture for the centennial of the fight at the North Bridge, which was celebrated April 19th, 1875, with no less a personage than the President Grant in attendance. French made another version of that, the one that we're with now. In 1889, it was a gift of the town of Concord to the nation for the new gunboat Concord, commissioned in that year. And this bronze served aboard the gunboat Concord in the Bay of Manila, for instance, in 1898, and then stayed in service, as it were. The gunboat Concord was decommissioned, a new one commissioned, and he moved on board the new one. And in fact was on the third gunboat named Concord in 1945, when that gunboat fired the last salvo of World War II, and he was present. According to the accounts that I've actually heard from veterans, he would have had cotton in his ears when they fired the salvo. Now we're looking at the back of the sculpture, and it's easier to appreciate from here how careful French was to design this in the round. It's meant to be walked all the way around, and we can see in particular some details back here. Here's the musket. Here is the one handle of the plow. Here's the other handle of the plow, the coat that's hanging on the handle of the plow. And here is the powder horn that the Minuteman is wearing. In 1924, Daniel French gave to the Concord Museum this powder horn, the powder horn that he'd used as a model for the figure on the Concord Minuteman. And it's got, you see this knob that French evidently enjoyed modeling in bronze on his version. We also have in the collection the coat that hangs on the handle of the plow. Perhaps we can look at that on another occasion. But we don't have the plow. And yet it's a very important element to this sculpture. You might imagine that the plow is meant to inform us that this is one of Ralph Waldo Emerson's embattled farmers, the phrase that he used in his Concord hymn of 1837. But actually that embattled farmer doesn't quite mean what we think it does. Usually it doesn't mean besieged. It means drawn up in military order. So a farmer drawn up in military order is rather a different thing than a besieged farmer. And Emerson meant it as drawn up in military order, using the term in the same way that William Shakespeare did, for instance. So if that's not quite what French is representing here, who is this with the plow? And in fact, it's a reference to a figure from classical antiquity, Cincinnatus, who was a consul in Rome in the early Republic, just a few hundred years after Romulus and the founding of Rome itself. He was a consul, which is a chief magistrate, but he retired to his farm on the banks of the Tiber and was apparently plowing in his field when the Senate came and requested that he take up dictatorial powers in order to resolve a military conflict. He was given dictatorial powers for 6 months. He only used them for 16 days. He resolved the military problem, went back to his farm and picked up his plow. And over time, he became the emblem of selfless service to the Commonwealth. where he could have been a dictator probably for life if he chose to. He went back to the plow. This was a story that meant a great deal to the early patriots who were involved in the formation of this nation, particularly George Washington, who actually acted out Cincinnatus in a way, when he returned his sword to the Continental Congress at the end of the Revolutionary War. What I'm sitting with is part of the tea service that belonged to Benjamin Lincoln, who was a member of the Society of the Cincinnati, which was formed at the end of the Revolution of field officers, French and American field officers. And this Chinese porcelain service, made around 1790, belonged to Benjamin Lincoln. And it's decorated with this emblem, which is the Order of the Society of the Cincinnati. This was meant to be worn to identify the members. It was designed by one of the members of the society, Pierre L'Enfant, a major in the French army, and it's L'Enfant actually designed that characteristic grid of Washington, D.C. when that city was initially built. As I mentioned, at the dedication of the full-sized sculpture at the North Bridge in 1875, there was a delegation, including President Grant, here to celebrate the centennial of what was recognized as the moment when the American Republic was formed.